for it.
Hello and welcome to this teaching webinar. The focus of this webinar is to provide support for teachers and support staff as we return to school in September following an unprecedented 6 months of lockdown. So we're going to take you through a short presentation that's going to give you some things to consider and tips and advice that hopefully will support you in the process of schools reopen. So my name is Stuart McLaughlin. I'm a recently retired head teacher from the London Borough of Havering. I've been the head teacher of 4 different schools over a period of over 16 years. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by Catherine Gould. Catherine is a very experienced school counsellor. She worked with me in my last school and has worked with a number of schools in the London area. So I'm very pleased that we can draw on Catherine's expertise as we go through the issues that we're going to cover today. And we thought we'd cover 4 main issues really, or 4 main areas. The first is teachers and support staff obviously are anxious about the fact we're returning to schools and schools will be opening for all pupils. So we're going to talk about how you can manage that anxiety. I know from speaking to colleagues, and I have spoken to ex-colleagues and colleague head teachers about in preparation for this webinar, that managing the expectations of parents is a concern because obviously parents are anxious, especially if their children have been really not going out and not mixing with other children. And then we're going to look at the issues for pupils as they return to school in terms of their social and emotional support, how we can re-engage them, and really the concerns about the lost learning, because there's almost a term and a half of learning that's completely not happened, or if it's happened in a more piecemeal way than if they were in school. And then we're going to finish by trying to give you some tips and advice on how you can adopt a positive mindset in returning to work. So firstly, let's think about the teachers and support staff and their anxiety around their own personal safety. And obviously, as soon as we go out and start mixing with other people, we can't eliminate all risk of spreading the virus. I mean, that's the reality. But what we can do is manage that risk the best we can. And as you can see from the screen there, schools have done fantastic work in preparing for the reopening of school. I know that because I'm a governor at a local primary school, and the amount of detail they've gone into ensure the maximum safety for the children and for the staff is really quite incredible. The bubbles, the fact that how we share equipment or limited sharing of equipment, restricting the movement of pupils, restricting the arrival or staggering the arrivals, staggering breaks, and everybody has had to fill in a very detailed risk assessment. And in many circumstances, those risk assessments have been quality assured by the local authority. But my tip to you and in returning in September is to really make sure you understand the rules and the routines, what's going to be new. And I'm sure that information has been shared with you, and I'm sure at the start of the school year, if you're having training days before the children come back, that will be a big part of that training. But really understand those routines. And having spoken to a colleague head, she said a lot of her staff are concerned about getting things wrong, and in getting things wrong, they may put themselves or other people at risk. But you've got to remember, this is new for all of us, and it's going to be a challenge for everybody. And you just got to do the best you can. And obviously, I would anticipate that once schools have opened, things will change because we can plan things without the children there. But once they're there, those rules and routines may well be adapted and changed. But of course, if you are very anxious, my advice to you is to talk to your head teacher or talk to a member of your senior leadership team about your anxiety so they can talk you through and they can reassure you about all the things that have been put in place. So over to Catherine. So what can teachers do to help manage their anxiety about their personal safety? So I know you're going to talk about grounding.
I think it's, as you've said previously, it is really, really important to acknowledge if you are feeling anxious. Don't feel any sense of shame or any embarrassment over that. It is completely normal to feel anxious. We're in really anxious times and a lot of uncertainty. With anxiety, one of the things it's probably important to kind of help control your own breathing and just kind of, you can slow down. Sometimes you can slow your thoughts down because your mind might be racing, or if you can actually physically slow your breathing down, that can help to slow your mind down. So even just simple things like taking a really deep breath. I know you've got on the screen the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding technique. So it's very simple. It's look around for 5 things you can see. It's about trying to keep yourself in the present moment, trying to stop your brain rushing off all over the place onto the anxious thoughts that you might be having. So look around for 5 things, 4 things that you can feel. I mean, that can even be something as simple as like running your hand through your hair, being aware of the chair that you're sitting on. Listen for 3 things. So, I mean, that could even be your own breathing, could be the sound of kids in the playground if you're in school. Anything that you can smell. It might be, you know, if you're wearing a perfume or something like that. But make yourself consciously aware of where you are in the present moment. And that can really help to then, you know, calm down your thoughts. It's almost, it sounds quite simple, and it sounds like, well, how's that going to make a difference? But actually it really can. And if you can slow your breathing down, I think you'll find that you will feel a whole lot less anxious.
Okay, that's really, really helpful. And in fact, I guess those techniques could be used with children that are feeling anxious as well, of any staff.
Absolutely.
The child
Yeah,
class.
it's something you can be experienced in using yourself and know that it does work. You can then also advise students to use the same techniques.
Yeah. So there's some more grounding techniques here.
Even, I mean, something like carrying something small, like a small stone in your pocket. I actually really like that, you know, literally it's a piece of the ground. You are grounding. And it's something that no one would know you were doing if it's just a small stone in your pocket. Running water over your hands. Well, I know we're all going to be washing our hands a lot when we're back in school, but even if you've got like a cold water bottle on your desk or something, even just holding that, it's something that can just help to kind of calm you down, and the change in temperature can just, you know, help you to help yourself.
Okay, and then you've got 3 quick and easy mental grounding techniques. So
yeah, very simple things. Think of your favorite things, favorite food, favorite place, favorite person. Even saying the alphabet slowly to yourself, it just kind of gives you a moment to just kind of gather yourself together if you are feeling really quite anxious or quite panicky. Or even, you know, think in your head the words to your favorite song. It can be something as simple as that, that just helps bring you back to the present moment and just try to stop your thoughts from racing and, you know, going in places that might be feeding the anxiety.
Thank you. That's really helpful, Catherine. Thank you very much. So moving on, so obviously anxious time for parents. And I think the key thing that we've got to remember is that the children that come back in September, their range of experiences will be very different. There will be some children that have been trying to do the learning that's been set. They may well have had some social interaction with other family members and other children possibly. There will be some children who have not really been out. Their parents have been very anxious about them catching the bug. And they've really suffered an experience of kind of lockdown. And therefore there will be real anxiety for those parents when their child has to return to school and mixing with all the other children in their class. So my main advice there would be really to try and ease their concerns and just talk through everything that the school is doing to minimize the risk. And, you know, we can't eliminate all risk with this horrible disease. And obviously, unless we all stay in our houses for the next 2-3 years, you know, that's the only way you wouldn't spread the disease. There's got to be some social interaction. So it's really trying to reassure them and talk them through. But also about the importance of their child needs to come back to school, because their children need an education. They need that social interaction that comes with being at school. But we have to be realistic. We can't guarantee safety, you know, but we can never guarantee that anyway. So I think really in terms of parents, if you are in a situation where parents want to talk to you about their concerns, it's just really talking them through all the steps that the school is taking to make sure that they can keep their child as safe as possible. And then really the pupils' social and emotional support. So obviously that's a huge area, and I'll talk a bit more about this a little bit later on. But I know that from the teachers that I've spoken to, they're really concerned about the experiences that some children would have had during the lockdown. In particular, they've lost that routine of going to school, the structure of the school day, and the discipline, I guess, that brings. Obviously, they've lost that learning time. And I know some of the students will be very anxious by the fact they will have fallen behind, because, you know, they want to do well at school. A key thing, and again, we'll come onto this later, is that loss of that daily contact with their friends and the relationships they have with the teachers in their school. And those, you've got to remember, education is a relationship-based process, isn't it? And it's all about that relationship between the teacher or the member of staff and the child. And of course, those relationships have not existed for over 6 months. And we also know that, and we know this from what's been released in the media, is that some safeguarding issues have been amplified by this period of being at home for a long period of time. So some children will come back to school having perhaps experienced things like domestic violence and other forms of other safeguarding issues. And of course, we do know from statistics that, you know, thousands of people have died of this disease, and some children may be experiencing bereavement. They may have lost somebody close to them during this period. One group of students that I'm particularly concerned about are those that are new to the school. So obviously the children that we know, that we've known for a number of years because they've been in our school, we kind of know their behaviours, and we would be able to spot if anything is different. But obviously, like the year 7s in secondary school, or the year 12s in sixth form, they're not known to the school. So obviously getting to know them and trying to understand what they may have been through will be really important. And obviously there will be new arrivals in any year group at any school who we don't yet know. So it's really important that we try and pick up something around what their experience has been like during the lockdown. So Catherine, how can teachers best support vulnerable pupils, especially those that have suffered you know, the trauma of something like bereavement?
So I think with recovering from trauma, the actual relationship with a kind of safe, trusted adult is absolutely key into moving through that trauma and recovering. So in many cases, teachers will be that stable person, you know, and someone who can help them manage their emotions. So particularly when children are traumatized, that, you know, their behavior may be unacceptable in school, but I think particularly when we come back to school, it's going to be about thinking more like, well, what's this behavior saying to me? What's going on with this child? Rather than this child's just being naughty, it's possibly highly likely that it will have been triggered by some kind of trauma. Yeah. So really talking to the students, like actively listening, giving them a chance to recognize that you're on their side and you're there for them. Kind of establish yourself as someone safe that they feel they can talk to, because really it is only through talking about what's gone on that I think they will start to move through the trauma and heal from it.
Yeah.
So even things like in lessons, if you can kind of see that the child's distressed, maybe even just like quietly acknowledging that. Some kids might be horrified. I mean, those of you that do know your students, they won't want the attention on them. It might just be maybe you do give them an excuse to quietly leave the classroom, or even just kind of, you know, giving them a look, giving them a wink, something like that, letting them know that you can see that something is going on for them and giving them space to talk if they do want that. But the relationship really is key in moving through and healing from trauma.
And I know from when we were talking before, in preparing for this, you said that if, you know, students want to use it as an excuse not to be in class, to get out of class,
yeah, particularly I know when we were speaking before, it was in regard to bereavement, and you might well get some children that just think, I've not been in school for so long, I can't sit in this classroom, and they just want to leave. But actually in many cases it can be really useful to keep that routine going, keep those boundaries in place. Don't feel that with every distressed child it's like, okay, you know, you can go to you know, leave the classroom. It might be really useful for them to stay in class and recognise that they are resilient enough to manage that bereavement, that trauma or whatever, and sometimes keeping the routine going can be really important. So it might well be that, like, you know, there is a difference between kind of complex grief and sort of regular bereavement, if that's an appropriate way of describing it. So you know, it might be that yes, the child is really, really sad and is really emotional about it, but actually they need to learn to manage those emotions, because grief is a part of life, bereavement is part of the life cycle. Yeah. So kind of running away from it and leaving the classroom may not be the most appropriate response. So if you can help them to stay in class, do. Obviously, you know, you're going to know your students, you're going to know if actually this child does need some time out, or maybe they do need some counselling. There's a lot of support and helplines out there, as well as probably your in-school counselling service.
Yeah. So obviously, as a member of staff, if you're a tutor or a teacher, obviously, and you might want to refer the child onto somebody within the school who may have more expertise in this area. But here are some contacts and charities that obviously can provide that sort of support for anyone suffering bereavement. Is that correct, Catherine? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, these are all really, really good charities. Winston's Wish is amazing, does a lot of work focusing on bereaved children, and they have a lot of online resources as well. Since the pandemic, they've developed a lot of online stuff. So there is a lot of support out there. Sometimes it's just knowing where to signpost people to. So these are certainly a really good start.
Thank you very much. So obviously, students coming back in September, they haven't been in school, or the majority haven't been in school since March. And the SSAT have done a lot of work on a recovery curriculum and looking at how we should re-engage students with their learning. I think it'd be naive to think that children are just going to come back and we can carry on how we left off in March. There's going to be work's going to need to be done to re-engage them before we can get back into that normal routine of learning that we had in March. And Barry Carpenter, who is a professor of children's mental health, and Matthew Carpenter, who is the principal of a college, they put together some support material, which is really what I've based this on. But if you look at what's on the screen now, and this really relates to what Catherine's been talking about, the common thread that runs through the current lived experience of our children is loss. It's that loss of things like that contact with their friends, that contact with their teachers, that loss of routine, that loss of learning, that loss of opportunities. And from that loss emanates three significant dynamics that will impact majorly on their mental health: anxiety, trauma, and bereavement. And they're very powerful forces. And what they're trying to say really is that we have to acknowledge that the students will be coming back, and this may well be what they've experienced and what they will be feeling. And it's now time to address the damage of loss and trauma so that it does not rob our children of their lifelong opportunities. Now is time to ensure that we restore mental health, mental wealth in our children, so their aspirations for their future can be a vision that becomes one day a reality. And I think the key message coming from Barry and Matthew is that we've got to plan for the return. And I know from my conversations with colleagues that is the case, that there is some form of recovery curriculum in place. And they go on to suggest that the recovery curriculum is built on 5 levers of recovery. And it's a systematic relationship-based approach to reigniting the flame of learning in each child. So I just want to quickly go through those 5 levers. So the first one is around relationships. And that's really trying to rebuild, and Catherine's talked about this already, the importance of those relationships and rebuilding those. And we need to plan how we are going to reconnect with the pupils when they return. And it's obviously, some simple things like, reach out and greet them and try and cushion them from the discomfort of returning. Some of them won't want to come back. It's the last thing they want to do is go back to school. So, kind of acknowledging that, acknowledging where they might be coming from. And, in doing so, showing that empathy for their experiences during the lockdown. And then over time, we've got to rebuild those rules, those routines, and the respect and get real consistency running through your class and through the school as a general. And recreating those norms and ensure the space for conversations. And I think, as Catherine said, it's that active listening. If students want to talk about their experience, it's really important that we actively listen and acknowledge what they may have been through or how they might be feeling. And I think it's really important to focus on the positives, because if you focus on the positives and make school fun again, and obviously that's really going to help the students want to re-engage with their learning. And I always talk about catching the students being good. Every opportunity where you see students doing the right thing, acknowledging that, whether that's using the praise and the reward system in your school, or just verbally acknowledging it. And I think over time, we've got to re-establish those high expectations. What we don't want is, because of the lockdown, we create an excuse culture. I think we've got to work very quickly to get back those high expectations in terms of behaviour and learning where we left off in March. And the second lever is around community. So how do we understand the needs of our community and ensure a smooth transition back into learning? So a key thing, again, is to listen to what happened in this time. And then trying to encourage that resilience. As Catherine said, the students that might want to find an excuse to get out of class, trying to encourage them to be resilient with their learning, so they don't give up too easily. And again, through that positive language and reinforcing the positive. And then perhaps we may have to teach the students the vocabulary to articulate their thoughts and feelings, giving them the words and the structures to actually do that. So the third lever is around the curriculum. So I know from what I've spoken to children that are really worried about the fact they've lost so much time and they may have fallen behind. you know, most students want to do well at school, don't they? And they feel that this period would have really hit them hard. So how do we do that? Well, we've got to be really explicit in terms of how we're going to fill those gaps. So obviously there may well be gaps in their learning that, you know, if you're starting year 5 or you're starting year 9, it's likely the children wouldn't be where they should be when they start that year. So we've got to be better identify the gaps and then be really explicit about how we're going to plug those gaps, how we're going to cover that material, and map out what the learning is going to look like in the short, medium and long term. And if possible, share that with parents. So things like knowledge organisers are really useful for that sort of thing. And especially if we go through a second lockdown, which, you know, is a possibility, at least then it's really clear what you were trying to cover, because we didn't have that opportunity before because it happened so quickly. The fourth lever is around metacognition, so that learning to learn. So now how are we going to reskill the students so they can get their heads back into how to learn effectively in the school environment. So make explicit the skills for learning, what skills you're trying to develop, and rebuild their confidence as learners, because the chances are that they will feel that they don't know enough, and that will obviously damage their self-belief and self-confidence. So things like low stakes quizzes where they can quickly, you know, realize that actually they do know this stuff. And be explicit why our topic is being taught and how it links to other learning. And if you know anything about how we learn and how long-term memory works, building those schemata is how you link one set of knowledge to another set of knowledge is really, really important. And that thing about focusing on the skills for learning is going to be really important. And then the final lever is that space to be. So how do we provide opportunities for the children to rediscover themselves and find their voice in learning? So encourage opportunities for students to express their opinions based on their learning. So you've got to give perhaps more chance for discussion when they return. And promote lots of collaboration and class discussion so that the students get the chance to talk. And that will help develop their vocabulary as well, of course. So those 5 levers are really important. And obviously, if you go on the SSAT website, you can find out more. There's some good articles about this that you could find out more. And then I was thinking about what sorts of things might you experience, what sort of struggles might you experience with students returning. So they may struggle to sit for an extended period of time because they haven't been used to doing that. And I know in secondary schools, some of you are worried that children aren't going to come to your classroom, you're going to go to them, they're going to be in a base most of the day. I know in primary school, that's the norm. But perhaps, you know, especially encourage more movement to get them out of their seats, moving around the class initially, so that they're not sitting down for too long at a time. And I would say if you're coming to a class and they've been there already with a different teacher, perhaps one of the things you do in the starter activity is to get them out of their seats and moving around, so that you can then start the lesson that way. Students might struggle to articulate their ideas, so plan regular classroom discussion. We covered this in the last point, to share and articulate their ideas, and don't give them the chance to say I don't know. You know, if necessary, get them to ask a friend or say, right, I'll come back to you, and take the discussion further around the class, and then come back to them once they've heard other children discussing whatever the topic is you're following. They may fail to write coherently because they're out of practice. So almost certainly you're going to have to provide additional differentiation, scaffolding, modelling, and those sorts of techniques that we use with children who may struggle with their writing. And I think that may be more the difference between students who can and cannot may be wider, because some students may not have engaged in learning during this period. So that scaffolding will be vital. They may demonstrate a lack of stamina because they may have worked at home, but they probably worked in fits and starts, whereas now they're suddenly sitting there for an hour or whatever the period of time that you teach is. So do things like, you know, set them a goal. So it might be, you know, in the first instance, right, we're going to write for 10 minutes now, we're going to write for 20 minutes now. Acknowledge that, you know, we haven't done this for a while. And you may want to give them sentence starters and increase the scaffolding so they know how to get going and they can get going with their writing. Some students may be demotivated. They may not, you know, they've been out of school for a long time and they may show a lack of effort. You know, again, acknowledge, you know, we haven't been in school for a while. You can understand how they might be feeling, but emphasize the importance of studying. And it's, you know, you've got to establish your high expectations around what you want them to do. And perhaps question them, you know, why is it you're feeling this way? As Catherine said before, you know, there may be a reason why their behaviour's changed. They may be showing less effort than they were before. and you may need to dig to find out what that might be, and then that can be addressed. And then obviously the students will show anxiety over lost learning, and it may have really hit their self-confidence. And again, as I said before, around the curriculum, showing the roadmap of the curriculum and how you're going to ensure that they are fully prepared, especially those, you know, in year 6, in year 11, in year 13, they may have increased anxiety because obviously they will be taking tests and exams at the end of the academic year. So it's really important that we try and give them some reassurance and give them the confidence to move forward. And just finally, about the academic side of things, obviously we are where we are. You know, we're not going to be able to make up 6 months of lost learning. You know, we're expected to work at pace anyway. I can't see how we're going to find the time then to go back and cover those 6 months. So I think the key thing is when you start the year is find out where that baseline is, identify the baseline, and then identify the gaps in learning, and then you have to adapt your planning accordingly. So it may well be that you've got a scheme of learning for year 6 or for year 10, but you can't start where that scheme of learning starts because there are gaps, and you're going to have to spend some time bringing the students back up to where they need to be. I mean, that's the reality of where we are. But we, you know, as teachers, we always rise to the challenge. So, you know, this is a difficult place, but we know we will rise to that challenge. And obviously there may need to be some intervention for students who have fallen behind, and there will be increased differentiation, but we need to make sure we plan that as well. And apart from the students, the other group of people that I know are really concerned are NQT. Those trainees from last year obviously haven't been in school since March, so they've lost a huge amount of their teaching practice. And the only thing I can say is that you're all in the same boat. You know, that's happened to every single trainee. So every NQT is starting the year, probably a little bit further behind than NQTs normally are. But your school will understand that, and you will get the support that you need. And you will very quickly get up to where you need to be once you start your new post. So finally, I'm going to move back to Catherine about adopting a positive mindset, because obviously it's very easy to go back to school in September and feel very negative about everything, because obviously we are facing huge challenges and lots of anxiety. So Catherine, can you talk us through the positive self-talk?
It's very easy to be our own worst critic, or to just be really negative about everything and think this is a disaster, it's not safe, the kids don't want to be here, or, you know, just to really kind of not only run ourselves down, but run everything down. But actually, if you can kind of adopt a positive mindset, if you can change the way that you think and feel, if you can change the way you think, you can change the way you feel. So if you're kind of saying things like, this is awful, I'm not good at this, particularly what you were saying about the NQTs, you're going to kind of get stuck in quite a negative place. It's very difficult then to change anything about your situation. So what we want you to try and do is kind of change the way that you're thinking. So rather than this is awful, go, well, you know, this is a tricky situation, but I'm doing my best. It's those kind of things. You know, what can you do to turn around those thoughts from a negative? What positives can you find in situations? So I know on the next slide, we've changed some of those thoughts from this is awful, could become let me focus on what is in my control and going well. So, you know, find the positives in every situation, because there is always something that is positive. Thinking I'm not good at this could become, well, I'm just learning how to do this. Be a little bit kind to yourself, don't run yourself down. I mean, this is something, if we can do as adults and model that for the students, that's a massive gift, I think, that we're giving them, because so many of them do think negatively about themselves. This is a massive thing that, you know, if you can get to grips with this, you can hand that on to the students as well. So, you know, thinking I'm rubbish, it could easily become, I just need to keep trying. And it's things like that. It builds our own resilience, and it helps us to build students' resilience as well. Even things like writing a gratitude journal, just noting down some of the things that have gone well that day. Do that at the end of the day, even if it's just 1 or 2 things. It really can help you to get into a positive mindset, which helps you start each new day in a better place.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think, yeah, I mean, a positive mindset, if as professionals, if you have a positive mindset, you're going to be more successful anyway, because those negative thoughts, they only have they can have a massive impact on your performance in any job, I guess. Yeah. So thank you very much for your support, Catherine. So I hope you found the presentation this morning useful. If you have any questions or require any further support, then obviously contact your local teaching branch. Thank you again to Catherine. I really appreciate your support this morning. And I wish you all the best of luck. I know that, as I said earlier, as teachers, we will rise to the challenge, and we will make sure that we are successful when schools reopen in September. So thank you and good luck.